Hi, my name is Hannah Jane Pritchett, current UA GIST Master's student and host of the UA GIST podcast, along with Chris Lukenbiel. Welcome to the University of Arizona GIST podcast. Our guest is Holly Torpey, part-time program coordinator for GISCorps. Let's get started.
Hello, my name is Chris Lukenbiel. I'm the director of the GIST programs here at the University of Arizona. And for this week's podcast, we're excited to have Holly Torpey with us today, who's with the GISCorps as the program coordinator for the GISCorps. And we're going to be learning a lot more about that today in our podcast. So we're really excited to have you with us today, Holly.
I'm excited to be here. I love talking about GISCorps.
Oh, great. And my wonderful co-host who has all of the brain power of the podcast is Hannah Jane Pritchett, a current MS GIST student in the graduate program at the UA. Hello, Hannah.
Hello. Hi. Very happy to be here, and thank you so much, Holly, for joining us. So let's just jump right in. Going back a little bit, can you tell us a little bit about your educational background in GIS?
Well, that's a long way back. I was told that I was a typical geography student in that I changed my major like 7 times before I found my way to geography. And then when I finally landed there and I said, God, it took me forever. And they said that's completely normal for a geography student because geography students are interested in a little bit of everything and they want to learn about everything. And so they keep changing their majors. And then finally they find geography where they can continue to learn about everything. So I was a geography major, and we had one class that was called computer cartography, but it was very rudimentary GIS. This was in the 90s. And I really started learning GIS when I did an internship in my last semester at University of New Orleans, where I had ended up after transferring a couple times also. I did an internship with a federal agency called Minerals Management Service, which is now called the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and they regulate the offshore oil and gas industry. And in that internship, I got to learn how to use ArcView, which was the newest, greatest Esri product at the time. We also used ArcInfo, and I think I worked on putting together an application that would allow their analysts to query census data to do analysis about environmental justice questions with regard to oil industry. So I did that for about 1 semester, and then that led to my first job, which was at the National Wetlands Research Center. And so I got to continue my GIS education on the job there, and it just proceeded from that point. And then much, much later in 2015, I decided to get a master's degree, and that's where I did actually study GIS at USC with their GIST program.
Oh, excellent. So what is the history of the GISCorps and how did you become the program coordinator for it?
Okay, so the founder of GISCorps is Sheree Elhami. She's the chief data officer at the city of Columbus, Ohio, and she came up with the idea of using GIS to give back to nonprofit organizations, and especially in times of natural disaster, to respond on a volunteer basis, matching volunteers with short-term volunteer opportunities with either nonprofit organizations or in times of disaster with government agencies that can't ramp up fast enough to deal with the disaster. And she launched the first project in 2003 with the Asian tsunami. And then it just built from there, and they've been involved with almost every natural disaster that has affected the United States and many that have affected other parts of the world since then. So the first project was 2003, and this year we have launched, I think we're on number 312 right now.
So is GISCorps involved with educational outreach, or is it more specific to getting volunteers to work on specific projects?
The focus is, so GISCorps doesn't self-deploy. We only respond to requests for volunteers. So if somebody requests volunteers to help with an educational program, like they want us to come and build capacity within an organization or at a university or something like that, then we do that. We've done K through 12 programs as well in the past, but only when an organization comes to us and asks for help with that kind of a thing. So our focus is just maintaining our volunteer database of 7,000 volunteers in 132 countries. And when these requests come in through our website, then we go through our database, we look at all the volunteer profiles, and we recruit the most qualified volunteer for each position and match that volunteer with the organization.
So what are some of the larger past projects that the Corps has been involved with?
So the very biggest project we've ever been involved with, I think, is ongoing, and that's the COVID-19 testing sites project. It's biggest both in, I think, the number of volunteers. We had over 700 people sign up for that project, although only somewhere between 300 and 400 of them actually ended up creating data. But also in length of time. That project has been going on for, it's almost, I think it's 8 months now. We started it in March. So for a disaster response type project with lots of volunteers, that's really long. Usually those projects are short. Like we have the NAPSIG crowdsourced photos projects, which are deployed or activated usually every time there's a hurricane that affects the United States, but also sometimes for earthquakes, like we did the recent earthquakes in Puerto Rico, and also for tornadoes and flood events. So NAPSIG is the National Alliance for Public Safety GIS, and they'll get a request from a federal agency for to deploy this project, which is called the Crowdsource Photos Projects, and then they'll contact us. We'll reach out to the volunteers, either volunteers who've already participated in this kind of project, or sometimes we'll recruit new ones for this project, and then we launch a project really quickly as soon as the storm is expected to make landfall. We'll have volunteers working to crowdsource photos of on-the-ground conditions, either from social media or from news websites. And they'll geolocate the photos using clues either in the photo itself or from the text that accompanies the photo, and map them so that emergency managers on the ground can see at a glance in, so we'll map those photos, display them in a dashboard that's got oh yeah, you've got it up for me, that's great. So that's a attachment viewer application where you've got a gallery view set up, and you can, as you zoom in on a geographical area, you'll see the photos that were mapped to just that area, so that you can see at a glance what conditions are like on the ground within that area. And then you can click on the photos and read the descriptions, or scroll through them. There are different ways to look at it. There's another application there that might be, there might be a link to it elsewhere on that page, where you can see, let's see, there's a dashboard that, there are a couple different, it's a dashboard that has 3 tabs, and one of them is that, is an attachment viewer like what you were just showing, but it only shows, it shows all the photos categorized by damage assessment score. And then there's another tab that shows all the photos categorized by FEMA Community Lifeline. And then there's a dashboard piece in the front that on the first tab that has totals for each of those lifelines, totals for each of the different damage levels, and shows all the photos on the map in the middle, and you can interact with that. The one that you showed a second ago was our historical incident viewer, which shows all of the past projects. Mm-hmm. So we were talking about the size of the projects, and those tend to have anywhere between like 10 volunteers and 50 volunteers, depending on how long the project lasts and how far and wide we recruit volunteers. And they'll map between, you know, 100 and 500 photos for each incident. And those, so those are pretty big too.
So what is the primary use or value seen for doing the crowdsource photo mapping in a disaster? Like, how are they?
Yeah, those are those are used by emergency managers and also first responders usually in emergency operations centers. So the most value is at the beginning of the storm when they haven't actually been able to get to the site yet and assess it in person. So this is a way for them to get situational awareness right in the beginning of the storm and really see what the conditions look like on the ground in areas that they don't have any people visiting and assessing yet. So the people who actually live there or the people who stayed there to ride out the storm, they're posting photos. There might be news crews there who are posting photos. So sometimes that's their first look at what they're getting themselves into. And so it allows them to assess where the worst damage is, what type of damage they're seeing, whether it be flood or wind damage, and where they should allocate resources initially.
So is that the GISCorps doing the data collection, or more like you try to get local people to submit their photos, and then Corps people are helping with the data management?
We are combing the internet looking for photos that people have posted. So it could be people just posting to their Twitter account, or it could be news outlets posting photos. Twitter is probably our #1 source of photos. And we also partner with another nonprofit called Cedar Digital Corps, and they help us out with developing automated Twitter feeds where they automate keyword searches so that they can feed us photos that are relevant. And then we have this volunteer portal that we built in Esri's Experience Builder, and it has a lot of different embedded applications. And one is for the volunteers to upload the photos using a Survey 123 form. Another page of the Experience Builder app is a Google Sheet that's embedded that's got a script behind it that is managing a photo queue. So we'll post, some people will be searching for the photos and they'll be adding them to that photo queue. And then as volunteers are working, they'll check out a photo and then indicate when they finish that photo, and then it moves to another sheet that's the archive sheet. So we kind of track our photos that way. And then we have another page that's like a gallery view so that they can check for duplicates before they bother trying to figure out where this photo is located. And then we have a final tab that's only visible to our smaller admin team, and they vet each photo. So the volunteers are geolocating the photos, adding them to the map, and then these vetters are taking a second look at each one, making sure that it's been located properly and that all the fields are filled out correctly. And then they add a damage assessment score, and they assign a primary FEMA lifeline. And then once they mark it vetted, then it's visible to the public. We also have done a couple projects recently. I mentioned that we've done a couple of tornado projects, and those were really interesting in how precise we could map the path of the tornado before the National Weather Service even really had that information available. And in some cases, we even were able to identify tornadoes that they hadn't identified yet, because people were posting photos of it almost immediately, especially after a tornado. It's not like a hurricane where you might have cell service and internet service knocked out over a wide area. With a tornado, it's such a narrow strip that there were plenty of people nearby who could take pictures and upload them with no problem. So pictures were coming online as soon as that tornado went by. And we were able to post them with a really high level of precision and see the exact track. And then it was confirmed later on with the layer that's produced by the National Weather Service. So that was pretty cool. Use of public or of crowdsourced data to create a better understanding of an emerging crisis situation.
With the disaster GIS relief efforts that the Corps gets involved with, is the crowdsourced disaster photo mapping one of the larger components now? Or
yeah, that's a big series of projects. It's become a whole kind of sub category of what we do, where we have a lot of volunteers who just work on those projects over and over. And they're really, I mean, nobody wishes for a disaster, but they're kind of fun because we have a Slack channel and everybody's working together. There's a lot of camaraderie. They're also a great way for students or other people who are just getting started in GIS to get a taste of some GIS applications and kind of gain some experience, work alongside more experienced GIS practitioners, get to know other people in the field, and in some cases develop a taste for emergency response and management. Because we don't require an extensive resume to participate in those projects. We just need people who are comfortable with working with maps and satellite imagery, and who have a high level of attention to detail, which GIS folks tend to have, and who are willing to obsess over the location of a photo until they find the exact location. And that can be a fun challenge. We kind of enjoy those projects, even though we don't wish hurricanes or tornadoes on anyone. We also have some projects that are running alongside those that are also with that same organization, NAPSIG, and it's a project that's focused on wildfire, early initial wildfire start reporting, also using crowdsourced data that's posted online. There are people kind of get familiar, people who are into wildfire, or not into it, but who follow, who are in that industry or are involved with wildfire prevention or detection or response, get to know a small set of kind of not authoritative in any official capacity, but people who just keep track of all this stuff, and they watch the flight data, and they're like the first ones to report online when there's a new wildfire being reported anywhere. They're listening to the scanners, and they're watching seeing where the planes are circling, and reporting it online. And so through this project, we have kind of a core set of volunteers, and we have a few of them assigned to each GAC, which is like a subset there. It's like a geographic boundary that is how they divide up wildfire regions across the country in the United States. So they'll be watching for reports of these initial starts, and then they'll map them and add them to a map that's publicly visible. And then it points people to all the authoritative sources of information about that particular incident. So it's sort of a way of harnessing the power of the crowd and putting it all onto a map in one place. So you don't have to know who these people are that you need to follow on Twitter to find this information or to hear about it first. You can just look at this map and see where people are reporting wildfire starts. And then it's also sort of a clearinghouse for all the other publicly available wildfire data, like satellite hotspots and CAL FIRE data and whatever else is available.
So you mentioned a little bit earlier the use of Survey 123. So I was wondering if you guys were based in mostly Esri products, or if you used other different softwares such as open source softwares.
Yeah, let me look. I've got our dashboard right here, and one of the graphs on our mission statistics dashboard shows the breakdown of software use. So it looks like our projects are about 54% commercial software, which would be Esri generally, and 24% open source, 17% a mixture of those, and then 5% not applicable, which means it's probably like a needs assessment or something like that, where we didn't use any software yet. So a lot of the open source ones are projects where we've been requested to support a humanitarian OpenStreetMap team project or other OSM-based project. Sometimes it's a QGIS project. It just depends. Sometimes it's like a proprietary, or not proprietary, but a, I don't know, something that's been developed custom but is open source for by a specific group or agency. What jumps to mind is a project that was done by the Copernicus, let's see if I could find it. Yeah, it was the it was called the E2MC project team, and it was an EU project to, it was kind of similar to the photo mapping project, the crowdsource photo mapping projects, but it was this application that had been developed. It was all open source, and it would get members of the public to look at a photo and confirm information about it. So these photos were automatically mined from social media, and then they would have the crowd assess each photo and like try to map it as precisely as possible and add a little bit more, fill in some attributes about that photo. So it's kind of similar to those NAPSG projects that we do, but it was all open source. And then another one was for an organization called the Texas Justice Initiative, and that one was all open source, and it's a group that they access on a monthly basis publicly available information about police-involved shootings in Texas, deaths in custody, shootings of police officers, related data like that, which is it's by law, it has to be publicly available, but it's actually difficult to access. Like you have to physically go, I think, to a place and file a request, and it's kind of an arduous process. So this organization does that every month and then publishes all the data online. And so they came to us to ask for an open source GIS web developer to create a map interface for so that people could interact with that data through a map. So, but all those NAPSG projects that I talked about are Esri based.
Huh. So when you get like incoming volunteer members, do you have to like figure out their software proficiencies, or
yeah,
do you do some screening in that way, or is it more, that as well as is it the project itself that kind of dictates what software is going to be used?
So when somebody comes to GISCorps and signs up to be a volunteer, they fill out a form where they indicate what software skills they have, what their level of GIS education is, what subject matter expertise they have, and a few other things, like what time zone do they live in, what languages can they work in, programming experience. So we have all of that in a database. And then when we get a request for volunteers, we can query that database and get a pool of volunteers to send the job description for the volunteer that we're looking for too. So we might say, okay, we need somebody who knows ArcGIS Online and Python and, I don't know, something else, Survey 123. And then so we'll query our database for people who have that specific set of skills. And we might get hundreds of people. We might also narrow it down by geographic region or by language or time zone or something like that. And then we will send out an email to all of those volunteers and invite them to apply for the position in some cases. So if it's one of our, what we call like our typical projects, which is where we match 1 or 2 volunteers with an organization, and then they work together over the course of several months to complete a project. For those projects, we do an actual recruitment process where we interview, we read everybody's resumes, we select the top candidates, we interview them, and then we choose the best, most qualified volunteer for that job. And then we put them in touch with a partner organization, and then we kind of step back and they work together and just report back to us on a monthly basis and let us know if they run into any snags, and at the end they submit a report describing the work that was done that we can put on our website. And you can see all of those on our website. There's a what we do menu. You can see reports on every project there. And then in the disaster response projects, which I've talked about today, those are different because we send out the opportunity announcement to a subset of the volunteers based on skills, but after that it's more of a sign-up process. They don't get interviewed or selected. Anybody who has gotten that recruitment announcement can join the project. So then there's just usually a sign-up link in there, and then they fill out a little form, or they just sign on to the project, and we send them another follow-up email usually where they get the links to the volunteer portal that we've put together and any other applications that they need, instructions, things like that, and then they can just get started. And usually for those, we also set up a Slack channel so that we can communicate throughout the life of the project. So those with those projects, our core committee members are much more directly involved with managing the project throughout its life. Whereas in the other types of projects, the core committee members just handle the recruitment, and then they hand off the project to the partner organization for the remainder of the project.
So for the disaster type projects, the ones that are more temporal other than COVID, which seems to stay around forever,
Right.
Is it more where the volunteers can have a range of skills rather than, being screened? Like you could test their ability, or I mean, just being able to geolocate a photo might be enough, rather than proficiency in Esri.
Right, because we're not asking them to build the app to run the project or anything else. It's more of an end user experience for them. So it's extensive GIS skills are not generally needed for those. It's more, we're looking more for a certain temperament, if anything. We need people, like I said before, who are super detail oriented and who can stick with the project, who will follow the instructions really carefully, and just do really careful work. That's the most important things for those projects, rather than any specific technical skill.
So what types of GIS activities can one do for the Corps?
So, I mean, on the non-disaster response projects that I mentioned, the more typical projects where we match 1 or 2 volunteers with an organization, those really run the gamut. I mean, there are all different kinds of projects. Some of them, I'm trying to think of some interesting ones that we've done recently. There's one underway right now where one volunteer, I think just one volunteer, is building a dashboard for an animal search and rescue organization. So they already have a Survey 123 form where people are collecting data in the field when they rescue an animal, or when they get a call to rescue an animal, or when an animal is evacuated to a shelter or something like that during a hurricane or other event. And then this dashboard will help aggregate and display that data so that they can keep track of where all those animals ended up and reunite them after the storm with their families. So that's an example. Another one that's underway right now is a needs assessment where 2 volunteers with extensive remote sensing experience are assessing the potential for using remote sensing to identify illegal scrap tire waste sites in South Africa, like anywhere in the whole country. So they're figuring out whether this is even possible, and if so, what's the best workflow. And then if they settle on a workable scenario that can be, funded enough, and, where they can have access to the imagery or the technology that they need to complete it, then they'll move on to a second phase of that project and actually find those sites. Another one that's totally different that was completed not too long ago is, or maybe it's still underway, I can't remember, but where one volunteer built an Esri hub site that allows members of the public to contribute, or I want to get this right. So they can either contribute historical information, or they can transcribe historical information, or digitize historical maps through a map interface for that represents like family history data for communities that are not typically well represented in archives. So we're talking about people who were enslaved, or other groups that where they didn't get counted in censuses necessarily, and so people researching their own families hit a dead end when they come to the Civil War. There's nothing before that. People are just counted as property and without names and things like that. So this is a way for people to contribute information that they may have been reluctant to share in the past, and digitize that information so that other people can have access to it as well, to trace their own family histories. And then other projects where volunteers have traveled overseas to conduct training on site with, like Sheree herself, she's our founder that I mentioned before. She went to Afghanistan and conducted training in a university there back in the early days of GISCorps. We've got some opportunities coming up. I can't go into detail about them, but that might involve some on-site mentoring and some like training and implementation of software overseas. So those are going to be some pretty cool opportunities that might be available in the future. But the vast majority of our projects now are remote, even before COVID.
So when the projects that require overseas or, that are not just remote working at home, are they all volunteer, like not non-paid positions kind of a thing? Or?
Yeah, nobody.
So
it's all volunteer. There may be, in those cases, usually the partner organization will cover the travel expenses or the accommodation or provide accommodation, but no, the volunteers don't get paid.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
So with the volunteers that you currently have, like how many are we talking about, and how many come for the are for in the disaster area versus maybe the the projects?
Let me turn to my trusty dashboard again. So this year, if I look at disaster missions, were 53% of our projects were disaster response, and 47% were non-disaster response. That's just this year. Overall, it's about 60% non-disaster response and 40% disaster response. But I would say that with each, well, I don't know, actually. I mean, there have been years in the past where, I don't know. I'm looking at past years, it looks like the disaster response portion of our projects has gradually been increasing. So it's been more and more focused on disaster response, but this year especially for obvious reasons.
So I was wondering, are there certain projects that volunteers are more drawn to?
I think the disaster response projects, they always generate a lot of interest. Partly, I mean, that's how I kind of got involved with, not initially with GISCorps, but with another group called Standby Task Force, was when Hurricane Harvey struck. And I was watching it from afar and just not able to help, but wanting to do something. And so a lot of people are just compelled to do what they can to help when they see these terrible disasters unfolding on TV, So a lot of people are definitely drawn to that. It feels good to be able to do something meaningful to help during those situations. And then the other projects, I'd say it really varies depending on the subject matter of the project, because they are so, they're so wide ranging that, one person might be drawn to one and not another. And it just really depends on the project and the person.
So Holly, you mentioned that one of your large ongoing projects, especially in need of support, is the COVID-19 testing sites data creation project. And you told us a little bit about it, but what kind of volunteer support are you looking for on that project? And maybe how could people get involved, and maybe tell us just a little bit more about that?
So the COVID-19 testing sites data creation project is an effort to create a nationwide layer of all the COVID-19 testing sites in the whole country. This has been a gap that we've been trying to fill since March, because each government entity, whether it be states, counties, cities, they're all managing their own testing sites and promoting their own testing sites on their websites. And some of them have testing site finder apps and maps of their testing sites, but there's no nationwide collection of that information. And the reason that's important, because the public can usually find that information on their local government public health website, or other local websites, or even now Google. You could just type in where to find testing and it'll show you some nearby sites. But federal agencies, researchers, journalists trying to assess the situation in the whole country and trying to identify trends and patterns and assess capacity and allocate resources, they need a nationwide data set for that. And it's so hard when it's all piecemeal all over the country. So for this project, we started out with over 300 volunteers adding data. And what they did was they sort of adopted a county or a region, and then they would visit those the authoritative websites for that region on a regular basis and update any new testing sites on a map. And so we're using a volunteer portal that we put together. It's an Esri-based volunteer portal, so it's got some custom apps where you can add data easily. It doesn't require extensive GIS experience. You are using ArcGIS Online and using the Smart Editor widget, but it's not difficult. What we really need are volunteers who, again, have a high level of attention to detail and who are willing to do this week after week, check on that website, make sure everything's up to date, add any new testing sites that they find. It also helps to be really good at searching the internet and social media, trying to find announcements about new testing sites, because we're not just mapping public testing sites, we're mapping private, urgent care facilities and clinics and nonprofits that are running testing sites all over the country. So it's a project that so far we've got over 30,000 testing sites mapped, but we're always behind. There are always new ones opening up, especially now we're seeing this trend of more and more of these pop-up testing site events that are only open for one day in a location, and those are really tough to keep up with. So we need all the help we can get, either by joining the project and helping us create the data directly, or just by spreading the word about the project and getting more testing providers to submit their data to us, because we also have a couple of Survey 123 forms where testing providers can submit their own testing sites directly to the map, and we just verify them and make them public, or they can update their own testing sites using another Survey 123 form. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach where we have volunteers going out and finding the data and adding it directly to the map, but we're also working really hard to try to get these testing providers to collaborate with us and provide the data directly to us, which benefits them because it helps get the word out, but it also benefits all of us because then federal agencies and other researchers can get a clear picture of what's really going on and decide where help is needed.
If someone was interested in helping out on this project specifically, is there something they do when they sign up for a volunteer on the Corps?
No, in this case, yeah, they'd have to sign up as a GISCorps volunteer first, and then they could just email me at admin@giscorps.org, and I would be more than happy to add them to the project. Like I said, it doesn't really require any specific GIS skills, more just a high level of attention to detail and a desire to help solve this problem.
Excellent. Well, we'll see if we can get some podcast members and listeners to join you.
That would be great.
So what is the relationship between the Corps and URSA?
So URSA is the Urban and Regional Information Systems Association, and it's a professional association. It's nonprofit, and GISCorps was formed as a program of URSA. So URSA is our parent nonprofit. We inherit our nonprofit status from them, and we, they handle some of our like financials and things like that. So they provide support to us and publicity and other types of things. They also hold an annual silent auction to help raise money for GISCorps. But beyond that, GISCorps is pretty independent, and you don't have to be a URSA member to be a GISCorps volunteer. Anybody can volunteer for GISCorps. Yeah, so I think that covers that.
Yeah, so how did you get involved with GISCorps?
Like I said, I was volunteering with another organization called Standby Task Force, and in several different projects we were volunteering alongside GISCorps volunteers. And when I was curious about GISCorps, and I remember looking at their website, and I was a little bit afraid that it was too much of a commitment, that I might not be able to. I saw, these in-person projects. I had, small kids at the time, and I didn't think, I didn't want to, commit to going and serving on a project somewhere for a long time, or I wasn't sure what it would entail. We've tried to kind of clarify the wording on the website now so that people understand that really signing up for GISCorps just means the only thing you're committing to is receiving emails. So it just means that you'll get an email whenever we have an opportunity that matches your profile with GISCorps, your skills and experience. And then it's totally up to the person who receives the email to decide whether or not they want to join that project or apply for that project, depending on the project type. So I kind of was hesitant to join GISCorps for a while, but then eventually I did, and found that I really enjoyed working with them, especially on the disaster response projects, and I enjoyed like I said earlier, the camaraderie that we experience, working together on this kind of intense, exhausting project, collaborating in the Slack channel, and just doing something collectively to help with that situation. And then after I had participated in a few GISCorps projects, GISCorps got some funding from Esri. Jack Dangerman asked Sheree what he could do to support GISCorps. He really appreciated the kind of work that we had been doing, and he wanted to do something to support this organization. And so she asked him if he could fund a position, because they really needed help, because the number of projects each year was just growing and growing, and it was being completely run by this volunteer core committee, and it was becoming a lot, like an overly large commitment for each of them to be able to keep it all going. So with that new funding, they were able to hire me. So it's a part-time position, and right. So yeah, I applied for that. I thought, oh, that would be perfect, because I love working on these projects, and now I could just do it as a job. And so I applied for that position, and I was really happy that they chose me for it.
So if Hannah Jane and I and others listening to the podcast wanted to join as volunteers, what do we do? How do we get started? To get emails first, I should say, and then
right. Yeah, you just go to the website, which is giscorps.org, and that's GISCORPS.org, and you'll see at the top of the website there's a link that says sign up to volunteer. So if you click on that, it'll tell you a little bit about what that means. Should tell you what I just mentioned, which was that you're just committing at this point to being notified when we have opportunities that match your skills and experience. And then you click that Join Us button, and you'll get a form. You fill out the form and submit it, and that's all there is to it. It doesn't cost anything to join GISCorps, and you don't have to be a URSA member like I mentioned before.
Do you see students or core members being able to use this as a resume item? Have you seen that?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of people have. I mean, there's a section you can create a section on your resume for volunteer contributions and add each different project that you've participated in there. In some cases, I mean, this is certainly not guaranteed, but in some cases, volunteers have ended up being hired by the organizations that they supported. After doing this volunteer work for them and proving themselves indispensable, they ended up creating a position for them or hiring them for another position when it came available. It also just helps because of the connections you make with the other volunteers that you work with, because you never know when one of those people might be hiring or in a position to recommend you for a position. And the other benefit with regard to career is that you can use your volunteer hours to earn GISP points toward GISP certification or renewal, if that's a goal of yours.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to ask, is how well it works with the GISP renewal.
Yeah.
Contribution.
So at the end of each project, we send out a feedback form to everybody who participated in it, and they report the number of hours that they contributed. And then we create and send to them a certificate of appreciation and a letter that documents their contribution to that project and says what they did on it and how many hours they contributed. And then it tells how that converts into GISP points, and you can submit that letter as your proof of your contribution.
Does the Corps do any like ongoing activities at the URSA conferences as well? Have a booth, talk about events, host panels, things like that? Or?
Yeah, so at the URSA conference, we had a virtual booth this year, and usually that silent auction takes place at the URSA conference also. Sometimes in the past, we've had a Corps committee member present at the conference or meet with volunteers. This year we had a sort of like our annual meeting at the virtual URSA conference. And we also host a kiosk at the ESRI conference every year in the Sustainable World community. And we usually host like a lunchtime special interest group at that conference also, where we meet with other volunteers. And I also represented GISCorps for the first time in 2019 at FOSS4GNA. So that was a really fun experience.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah.
So in terms of memberships in the Corps, I guess that wants me to ask is how many do you know the international to US comparison of Corps members?
Well, on our website, if you click on the Who We Are menu and then select volunteers, you can see a map of where all the volunteers are located, and you'll see that the vast majority are in North America, but we have lots of volunteers who live all over the world too. And the volunteers who live outside of North America do tend to have a lot more open source experience and skills and interests.
Oh, that's really exciting.
Yeah.
Well, Holly, it's been wonderful having you with us today on the UAGIST podcast. And we're excited to get our students, our alumni, and our listeners to join and get some experience and work with your group, because you're doing really exciting work. And it seems like it's an evolving area too, where if we would have met you and did this together around the founding of it, it would have been quite a bit different.
Yeah, it is. It changes every year, I think. Yeah, it's an exciting organization to be part of, because we do different things all the time. It's there's always something new happening and a new organization that we're supporting. So it's a lot of fun, and it's a way to really get to experience domains of GIS or subject areas of GIS that you might not get to otherwise in your day job or in your education. So it's a great way to kind of branch out and dip your toe in other areas of GIS, and sometimes end up leading you in a whole new direction with your career.
Great. Thank you again, Holly.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.